Story number 1. The horrifying case of Mary Vincent. Mary Vincent was a creative and talented teenager growing up in Southern California during the 1970s. At just 15 years old, she had big dreams of becoming a competitive dancer and showed remarkable talent in the performing arts. By the age of 13, she had already performed a solo dance routine at the prestigious Miss Universe pageant, showcasing her potential on a grand stage. However, her life took a turn when her parents divorced. Seeking an escape from the emotional strain at home, Mary began hitchhiking to the Bay Area, where she felt at home among other artists and performers. During the 1970s, hitchhiking was a common way for young people, especially teenagers without their own transportation, to travel, making it a seemingly practical choice for someone like Mary. On September 28, 1978, Mary decided to travel south to Los Angeles to visit her grandfather. She stood on the roadside with 2 other hitchhikers, hoping to find a ride. Eventually, a blue van pulled up, driven by a man named Lawrence Singleton. The 50-year-old driver immediately seemed odd. When asked to take all 3 hitchhikers, Singleton insisted he only had room for 1 passenger, even though the back of his van was completely empty, lacking even seats. Despite the red flags, Mary decided to accept his offer, a decision that would forever change her life. Singleton was adamant that only Mary could enter his vehicle. In a 2023 interview, Mary recounted that her fellow hitchhikers advised her against accepting the ride. "The guys I was with kind of pulled me aside and said, 'I wouldn't get in there if I were you,'" she remembered. Despite her companion's warnings and her own instincts, Mary Vincent, feeling fatigued, climbed into Singleton's van. Initially, the journey appeared uneventful as Singleton navigated the familiar routes towards Southern California. However, he soon diverted toward the desert. This change in direction alarmed Mary, prompting her to instruct Singleton to turn back. He complied and pulled over. Seizing the opportunity while he stepped out to relieve himself, the 15-year-old decided to escape. As she exited the vehicle and bent down to tie her shoe, Lawrence Singleton approached and struck her on the head with a sledgehammer. He proceeded to assault Mary brutally throughout the night, as she drifted in and out of consciousness. The full extent of his horrific actions became evident the following morning. Armed with an axe, Singleton forcibly removed Mary from his van. He severed her arms at the elbows to hinder identification of her body. Although she remained conscious, she was losing significant blood and began to lose strength. In an interview with I Survived, Mary recounted her thoughts during Singleton's attack. "He took my left arm and took 1 swing, and I started to fall, and then he took another swing, and I grabbed his arm, grabbed it real tight, and I couldn't figure out, holding him real tight on his arm, but I'm still falling," she reflected. Convinced that Mary was dead, Singleton discarded her body over a cliff, where she fell 30 feet into a concrete culvert adjacent to Interstate 5. Yet, Mary Vincent was not dead. In excruciating pain and exposed, the 15-year-old resisted the temptation to succumb to unconsciousness and death. Instead, she covered the remnants of her arms with mud, packing it down to stem the bleeding. While recovering in the hospital, Mary Vincent provided police with a detailed description of her attacker, recalling every feature she could remember. She said, and I quote, "I wanted to make absolutely sure they would know him the moment they saw him," she later said. "I described him as if I were describing someone to a blind person." Within a week, a neighbor of Lawrence Singleton recognized the police sketch and contacted authorities, leading to his arrest. Just 6 months after the attack, Mary, now wearing prosthetic arms, faced Singleton in court. Despite the trauma she had endured, she courageously took the stand and recounted every detail of the horrific hours she had spent as his captive, ensuring the jury understood the extent of his brutality. Singleton was convicted of attempted murder, rape, and several other crimes against Mary. However, the laws at the time imposed lenient sentences for sexual offences, even in cases as egregious as Singleton's. He received the maximum sentence allowed under the law, just 14 years in prison. As Singleton exited the courtroom, he reportedly leaned toward Mary and whispered a chilling threat. "If it's the last thing I do, I'll finish the job." After serving just 8 years of his 14-year prison sentence, Lawrence Singleton was released early for good behavior. The decision to let him go sparked national outrage, as the leniency of his punishment for such horrific crimes, especially those committed against a minor, shocked the public. The widespread anger over his early release led to the passage of California's Singleton Bill in 1987, which established a minimum sentence of 25 years for crimes involving torture. Mary Vincent, along with other survivors, supported the bill. However, since the law was enacted after Singleton's release, it could not be applied retroactively to him. Singleton's freedom had deadly consequences. In 1997, just 9 years after his release, he brutally murdered 31-year-old Roxanne Hayes, a mother of 3, while living in Sulphur Springs, Florida. A neighbor called 911, and when police arrived, they found Singleton at the scene, covered in blood, and arrested him. During his trial for Roxanne Hayes' murder, Mary Vincent courageously testified once again, recounting the horrific details of what Singleton had done to her nearly 2 decades earlier, in hopes of ensuring he would never harm anyone again. Singleton was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death for killing Roxanne Hayes. However, he never faced execution. In 2001, Lawrence Singleton died of cancer while on death row, finally ending his reign of terror. Story number 2. The murder case of Junko Furuta. Junko Furuta, a promising young high school student from Misato in Saitama Prefecture, Japan, was born on January 18, 1971. Known for her intelligence, beauty, and exemplary behavior, Junko was admired by her peers and teachers alike at Yashio Minami High School. She stood out as a diligent and kind-hearted individual, choosing to abstain from drinking, smoking, and other vices, earning her the reputation of a model student. Tragically, her life took a devastating turn in late 1988, when she became the victim of an unspeakably cruel and prolonged crime. On the evening of November 25, 1988, as Junko was riding her bicycle home from her part-time job, she unknowingly crossed paths with Hiroshi Miyano, an 18-year-old with a notorious reputation. Miyano had a history of delinquency, including theft and sexual violence, and was known to brag about his ties to the Yakuza, Japan's infamous organized crime syndicate. Days earlier, Miyano had approached Junko with romantic intentions, only to be rejected. Her refusal wounded his ego and fueled a vengeful rage, leading him to plot a heinous act against her. Miyano and his accomplice, Shinji Minato, devised a plan to capture Junko. As she rode through a quiet park, Minato kicked her off her bicycle, pretending to have injured her accidentally. Miyano, feigning concern, stepped in as a helpful bystander and offered to walk her home. Trusting his offer, Junko had no idea she was being led into a nightmare. Miyano instead forced her to an abandoned warehouse, where he revealed his criminal connections and assaulted her. That night, he took her to a hotel, continuing the abuse while threatening her and her family with violent consequences if she resisted or spoke out. By the early hours of the next morning, Miyano brought Junko to Minato's family home in the Adachi district of Tokyo. There, they were joined by 2 more teenagers, Joe Ogura and Yasushi Watanabe. Together, the 4 boys held Junko captive for what would become 44 days of relentless torment. Junko was forced to call her parents and lie, telling them she had run away and was staying with a friend. The Minato family, despite living in the same home, turned a blind eye to her plight, afraid of the gang's Yakuza ties and the potential repercussions of intervening. Over the course of her captivity, Junko endured an unimaginable level of physical, psychological, and sexual abuse. The boys subjected her to repeated assaults, burned her with cigarettes, and used implements such as iron rods, scissors, and heated light bulbs to inflict pain. Her injuries became so severe that she lost the ability to stand or use the bathroom properly, leaving her dependent on crawling. Despite the obvious signs of her suffering, no significant effort was made by anyone to intervene or rescue her. 2 instances offered fleeting hope for Junko's salvation, but both ultimately failed. A schoolboy who heard about her situation reported it to the police, but when officers visited the Minato home, they were convinced by the boys that no girl was inside. On another occasion, Junko managed to call the police herself, but before she could speak, the boys discovered her and prevented the call from leading to a rescue. On January 4, 1989, Junko's ordeal came to an end in the most brutal way imaginable. Angered after losing a game of mahjong, Miyano and the others took out their frustration on her. They beat her, poured lighter fluid over her body, and set her alight. Even as she suffered severe burns, the boys continued their attack, leaving her to succumb to her injuries. Her body was then disposed of in a 55-gallon drum, filled with concrete, and abandoned on a construction site. It wasn't until a confession months later that her remains were discovered, bringing her story to light. The discovery horrified the nation and led to the arrest of Miyano, Minato, Ogura, and Watanabe. Despite the overwhelming evidence of their crimes, the boys received sentences that many deemed disproportionately lenient. Miyano was sentenced to 20 years in prison, while Minato, Ogura, and Watanabe received sentences ranging from 5 to 10 years. All were tried as juveniles despite the barbarity of their actions, sparking outrage and calls for judicial reform. Junko's parents, devastated by their loss, expressed profound grief, not only over her death, but also over the perceived inadequacy of justice. They later pursued and won a civil lawsuit against Minato's parents for their indirect role in allowing the crimes to occur under their roof. However, no legal resolution could undo the tragedy or provide solace for the immense suffering Junko endured. Junko Furuta's story remains one of the most horrific crimes in Japan's history. It serves as a sobering reminder of the depths of human cruelty and the importance of vigilance in protecting the vulnerable. Her life, filled with potential, was extinguished by senseless violence, leaving behind a legacy of sorrow and a call for a more just and compassionate society. Story number 3. The Toolbox Murderer. Lawrence Bittaker was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and was adopted as an infant. His adoptive father, George Bittaker, worked in the aircraft industry, requiring the family to relocate frequently. By the time they settled in California, Bittaker had lived in 4 different states. Despite having an impressive IQ of 138, placing him in the top percentile, he dropped out of high school at 17. By then, he had already faced several arrests for minor offenses. Shortly after leaving school, he was sentenced to 2 years for auto theft, evading arrest, and leaving the scene of a hit-and-run. Just days after completing his sentence at the California Youth Authority, Bittaker was arrested again in Louisiana by the FBI for violating the Interstate Motor Vehicle Theft Act. He received an 18-month sentence at a federal reformatory in Oklahoma, later being transferred to a medical facility in Missouri for good behavior. Bittaker later claimed he had his first sexual experience during this time, but refused to provide details other than it involved a woman. He was released after serving only 1/3 of his sentence. In 1960, Bittaker was arrested in Los Angeles for robbery. The following year, he received a sentence of 1 to 15 years in state prison. Psychiatric evaluations at the time described him as manipulative, paranoid, and bordering on psychotic. Despite these findings, he was conditionally released in 1963. 2 months later, he was arrested again for parole violations and suspected robbery. Over the next 15 years, Bittaker's criminal history grew, with frequent incarcerations for various crimes. One of his final convictions before meeting his infamous partner was for attempted murder after stabbing a grocery store clerk in a parking lot during an attempted shoplifting of a steak. While serving time at the California Men's Colony in San Luis Obispo, Bittaker crossed paths with Roy Norris. Roy Norris was born in Greeley, Colorado, and enlisted in the U.S. Navy at 17. Most of his service was spent in San Diego, though he served briefly in Vietnam without seeing combat. In 1969, Norris was arrested for attempting to rape a female motorist. While out on bail, he was arrested again for breaking into a woman's home intending to assault her, but was caught by police. Following these incidents, the Navy discharged him for psychological problems and a severe schizoid personality. In 1970, while still on bail, Norris attacked a female student from San Diego State College, smashing her head with a rock and slamming it into the street. She survived, and Norris was charged with assault with a deadly weapon. He was sent to Atascadero State Hospital, a psychiatric facility for mentally disordered sex offenders, where he remained for 5 years before being released after being deemed no longer a danger to others. Just 3 months after his release, Norris strangled a woman until she lost consciousness and then raped her. A month later, he was identified as the perpetrator, arrested, and convicted of forcible rape. While serving his sentence in San Luis Obispo, he met Bittaker, who, according to Norris, saved his life on 2 occasions. The two bonded over shared sadistic fantasies and devised a plan to kidnap, torture, and murder young women to ensure no victims survived to identify them. Upon their release, the pair set their plan in motion. Bittaker, paroled first, secured a job as a machinist in Los Angeles. Norris was paroled 2 months later, moved in with his mother in the city, and found work as an electrician. By February 1979, the two had reconnected and began putting their horrifying plan into action. Lawrence Bittaker purchased a 1977 GMC cargo van that was specifically chosen for its suitability for their crimes. The van, which lacked side or rear windows and had a large sliding door on the passenger side, allowed for quick and discreet abductions. They nicknamed the vehicle the Murder Mac and spent several months practicing by driving along the Pacific Coast Highway, stopping at beaches to talk to young women and take their photos. In June of that year, they carried out their first abduction. 16-year-old Cindy Schaefer was forced into the van, her mouth duct-taped and her wrists and ankles bound. After driving to a fire trail in the mountains, Bittaker and Norris raped, tortured, and murdered her, later disposing of her body in a canyon. Their next victim, 18-year-old Andrea Hall, was abducted in July. After subjecting her to repeated assaults and mocking her by encouraging her to scream, they killed her. On September 3rd, they kidnapped 2 more victims, Jackie Gilliam, 15, and Leah Lamp, 13. The girls were held captive for 2 days, during which time they were repeatedly assaulted, and their torment was recorded. Both were murdered after the extended captivity. Later that month, on September 30th, Shirley Sanders became another victim when she was abducted and raped. However, she managed to escape and report the assault to police. Unfortunately, she was unable to provide identifying details about her attackers or the van, and no further action was taken. On October 30th, their final victim, Shirley Lynette Ledford, was abducted. Unlike their earlier victims, she was tortured and raped while the van was being driven, rather than at their usual remote location. After murdering her, they left her body on a residential lawn in Hermosa Beach, an unusual deviation from their pattern of hiding bodies in remote areas. This gruesome act drew significant media attention, and the press dubbed the unknown perpetrator the Toolbox Killer, initially believing the murders to be the work of a single individual. Bittaker and Norris specifically targeted teenage Caucasian girls, often with dark blonde hair. Their disturbing objective was to murder one victim from each year of adolescence, ranging from 13 to 19. Approximately once a month, they would cruise around in their van, which they had nicknamed the Murder Mac, searching for potential victims. Using deceptive methods, they would either convince their targets to hitch a ride or forcibly abduct them through the van's side door. The break in the case came when Norris bragged about the killings to an acquaintance, Jimmy Dalton, a fellow former inmate. Although Dalton initially thought Norris was lying, he reported the information to his lawyer after Ledford's body was discovered. The lawyer passed the tip to the Los Angeles Police Department, prompting an investigation. Detectives began surveillance on Norris, eventually arresting him for parole violations and marijuana possession. Bittaker was later arrested for his involvement in the abduction and rape of Shirley Sanders. Under pressure during interrogation, Norris confessed to his role in the crimes, but downplayed his involvement, claiming he had been heavily under the influence of drugs and that Bittaker was the primary instigator. In exchange for a plea bargain, Norris agreed to cooperate with investigators, helping them locate the bodies of Jackie Gilliam and Leah Lamp, and providing testimony against Bittaker. Both men were charged with numerous counts of kidnapping, rape, torture, robbery, and murder. Despite Norris's efforts to shift the blame entirely onto Bittaker, audio recordings of the murders revealed that he had been an active participant. Norris ultimately received a sentence of 45 years to life, benefiting from his cooperation in the investigation. He applied for parole in 2009 but was denied, and again in 2019, when he was deemed ineligible for release. He remained in prison until his death on February 24, 2020. Bittaker, who was convicted on multiple charges and sentenced to death, spent the remainder of his life on death row. He died of natural causes in 2019 while awaiting execution. Their crimes remain among the most horrific and shocking in U.S. criminal history. Story number 4. The Colorado Hammer Murderer. The attacks came suddenly and brutally in the dead of night. The intruder would slip into unlocked garages, quietly navigate through dark hallways, and make his way up the stairs to his victims' bedrooms. Standing over them, his face obscured by shadows, he would unleash a violent assault, striking them repeatedly with a hammer or another heavy object. Some of the Colorado Hammer Killer's victims survived the savage attacks, but others were not so fortunate. In the early hours of January 16, 1984, the Bennett family of Aurora, Colorado, fell victim to this brutality. Bruce Bennett, 27, his wife Deborah, 26, and their 7-year-old daughter Melissa were all murdered by the man later identified as Alex Ewing. Bruce confronted Ewing at the top of the stairs, engaging in a desperate struggle. The two fought fiercely, tumbling down the staircase and breaking spindles in the banister during the altercation. Despite his efforts, Bruce was overpowered. Ewing bludgeoned him with a hammer and then used a butcher knife from the kitchen to slash his throat. Ewing then ascended the blood-stained stairs, where he sexually assaulted Deborah and the children before using the hammer to beat them. The youngest member of the family, 3-year-old Vanessa, survived the horrifying ordeal. However, Ewing left her with devastating injuries, shattering her jaw, skull, arms, and legs during the attack. The tragic loss and survival of the Bennett family became one of the most harrowing chapters in the violent spree of the Colorado Hammer Killer. Vanessa was discovered that morning, wedged between her bed and the wall, unconscious and covered in blood. Despite the severe blows from the hammer, she was miraculously still alive. As the sole survivor of the horrific attack, the bright-eyed 3-year-old suddenly found herself alone in the world, her mother, father, and sister all taken from her in one night. Reflecting on the devastation, Vanessa later said, "There's no fixing what he took from me." At the time, neither Vanessa nor the authorities knew that her family had fallen victim to one of Colorado's most brutal serial killers. Over a span of 12 days in January 1984, Alex Ewing unleashed a series of violent attacks across the Denver metro area. These included assaults on Jim and Kim Haubenschild, Donna Holm, both of whom survived, and the fatal attack on the Bennett family in Aurora. Ewing also murdered Patricia Smith, a 50-year-old interior designer, in nearby Lakewood. 11 days after the Colorado spree, Ewing continued his rampage in Arizona, where he attacked Roy Williams in Kingman as he slept, using a rock as a weapon. His violence culminated on August 9, 1984 in Nevada, where he was arrested for attempting to kill Nancy and Chris Barry in Henderson with an axe handle. It wasn't until 2018 that authorities conclusively linked the Colorado crimes to Ewing. DNA evidence tied him, already serving a 40-year prison sentence in Nevada for the Henderson attack, to the murders of the Bennett family and Patricia Smith. The discovery confirmed what investigators had long suspected. Ewing was a serial predator whose reign of terror had haunted multiple states. Convicted in 2021 for the Bennett's murders, and in 2022 for killing Smith, Ewing, 61, is serving 4 consecutive life sentences. Vanessa survived the attack, but she describes her life as a lifelong struggle filled with both emotional and physical pain. Decades later, she continues to grapple with the trauma that forever altered her life at such a young age, leaving her with scars that go far beyond the physical. In the years following the tragedy, Vanessa faced significant challenges. She battled homelessness and drug addiction as she tried to cope with the devastating memories that had haunted her since childhood. Today, Vanessa is on a journey toward healing. When she turned 30, she made a personal commitment to take control of her life and no longer see herself as a victim, marking a turning point in her path to recovery. Story number 5. The Twisted Case of the Fernandez Child. Gabriel Daniel Fernandez was born on February 20, 2005, to parents Arnold Contreras and Pearl Fernandez. Not long after his birth, Gabriel was placed in the care of his great-uncle, Michael Lemos Carranza, and Carranza's partner, David Martinez. In 2009, at the age of 4, he was relocated to his grandparents' home due to his grandfather's strong opposition to Carranza and Martinez's same-sex relationship. Gabriel remained with his grandparents until 2012, when his biological mother, Pearl Fernandez, along with her boyfriend, Isauro Aguirre, took him into their custody. This decision raised concerns among several family members, as you'll hear why. Pearl Fernandez was born to Robert and Sandra Fernandez. Her early years were marked by many difficulties. Her father was frequently incarcerated, and she later claimed that her mother was both neglectful and abusive. By the time she was 9 years old, she had begun using methamphetamine and consuming alcohol. At 11, she ran away from home, and her formal education ended when she dropped out in 8th grade. She later recounted experiencing severe trauma, including an alleged attempted assault by her uncle, and a harrowing experience where she claimed she was held captive for days by multiple men who took turns assaulting her, leading her to struggle with suicidal thoughts. During her life, Pearl Fernandez had 4 children with Arnold Contreras, including Gabriel. After giving birth to Gabriel, she left him in the hospital just 3 days later, though she later regained custody of him in 2012, as mentioned before. Additionally, she has alleged been subject to abuse by several of her romantic partners, including Isauro Aguirre, the man she was with at the time of her gaining custody over her son Gabriel. However, according to her aunt, Elizabeth Carranza, and Elizabeth's husband, Pearl's portrayal of herself as a victim was deceptive. They claimed that it was actually Pearl who was manipulative and abusive toward her partners. Moreover, there were legal charges pending against her at the time, including accusations of threatening to stab someone. During the 8 months that Gabriel Fernandez lived under the care of Pearl Fernandez and Isauro Aguirre, he endured relentless abuse and torture. He was subjected to frequent beatings that left his bones fractured, burns inflicted by cigarettes and heated objects, and injuries from being shot with a BB gun. His teeth were reportedly knocked out with a bat, and he was forced to consume cat litter, animal waste, spoiled food, and even his own vomit. In addition to physical abuse, he suffered severe psychological torment, including being gagged and bound while locked inside a small cabinet to sleep. He was also forced to wear girls' clothing, while his mother and her boyfriend allegedly mocked him during the abuse. Prosecutors later stated that Aguirre's actions were fueled in part by his belief that Gabriel was gay. On May 22, 2013, after failing to put away his toys, he was brutally beaten to the point of unconsciousness. Realizing the severity of his condition, Pearl Fernandez eventually called 911. Paramedics rushed Gabriel to Antelope Valley Hospital, where doctors determined he was brain dead. 2 days later, he was pronounced dead at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. An autopsy later confirmed that his death was caused by blunt force trauma, worsened by prolonged neglect and malnutrition. Story number 6. The Tinder Murderer. Grace Millane, originally from Wickford, Essex, had recently completed her undergraduate studies at the University of Lincoln, earning a degree in advertising and marketing. As part of her gap year, she went on a backpacking journey. Her travels brought her to New Zealand for a planned 2-week visit, following a 6-week stay in South America. She arrived in the country on November 20, 2018, exploring various locations across the Upper North Island before reaching Auckland on November 30th. On the evening of December 1st, at approximately 9 p.m., she was spotted on Victoria Street in Auckland's central business district. Shortly afterward, at 9:15 p.m., CCTV footage captured her at Sky City. The last known sighting of Grace was at 9:41 p.m., when she was seen entering the City Life Hotel on Queen Street with Jesse Kempson, a man she had linked with on a dating app. Grace Millane's parents became alarmed when she failed to respond to the birthday messages they sent her on December 2, 2018. 3 days later, they reported her missing, prompting police to begin an investigation. Hotel staff reported that Millane had not returned to her room the night she disappeared. Initially, authorities stated there was no evidence of foul play. However, they later concluded that she was no longer alive based on gathered evidence. On December 8th, police confirmed they were treating the case as a homicide, and Jesse Kempson was charged with her murder shortly thereafter. The next day, December 9th, Millane's body was discovered around 4 p.m. near Scenic Drive in the Waitakere Ranges after being carried out of a hotel room in a suitcase. A post-mortem examination was conducted on December 10th, followed by further investigations in the area on December 11th. Police sought public assistance in locating a shovel believed to be connected to the case, which was later recovered on December 13th. Additionally, authorities asked for information about a rental car Kempson had used between December 2nd and December 3rd. The vehicle, which had been released, was eventually located in Taupo, about 275 kilometers south of Auckland, on December 8th. The trial for Jesse Kempson began on November 4th, 2019, with jury selection marking the start of proceedings. Kempson maintained his not guilty plea, and the trial was expected to last for 5 weeks. The prosecution, led by Crown Solicitor Brian Dickey, argued that Kempson had murdered Grace Millane by strangling her following a Tinder date. They presented evidence showing that after her death, Kempson conducted online searches on disposing of a body and viewed pornography. Dickey described Kempson's actions as calm and calculated, stating that he methodically disposed of Millane's body and evidence while weaving a labyrinth of storytelling and lies to mislead investigators. 3 women who had also met Kempson on Tinder testified that he had a preference for masochistic and bondage-style sexual practices, including choking. The prosecution introduced security footage of Kempson and Millane together, and evidence showing Kempson renting a carpet cleaning machine from a Countdown supermarket on Key Street. Pathologist Simon Stables, a Crown expert witness, testified that the bruising on Millane's body was consistent with restraint and asphyxiation. Her blood alcohol level was also measured at 106 milligrams per 100 millilitres, more than double New Zealand's legal driving limit of 50 milligrams per 100 millilitres. The defence, led by Ian Brookie, contended that Mylène's death was the result of a consensual sexual activity that went tragically wrong. They claimed Mylène had expressed an interest in bondage and sadomasochism and had requested Kempson to choke her during an intimate encounter. While acknowledging that Kempson attempted to conceal her body, the defence argued this was out of panic. Pathologist Fintan Garavan, the defence's expert witness, disputed the Crown's evidence, suggesting Mylène's injuries were consistent with consensual acts given the absence of defensive wounds. Garavan also pointed to her alcohol consumption as a contributing factor in her death. Defense lawyer Ron Mansfield further argued that Kempson's tendency to lie about his wealth and success stemmed from personal insecurities. The trial spanned 3 weeks, concluding on November 22, 2019, when the jury of 7 women and 5 men deliberated for 5 hours before delivering a guilty verdict. Members of the jury were reportedly emotional, with some seen in tears. Mylène's parents, David and Gillian, expressed relief at the outcome. In New Zealand, a murder conviction carries a mandatory life sentence with a minimum parole ineligibility of 10 years, except in cases deemed manifestly unjust. On February 21, 2020, Kempson was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum non-parole period of 17 years. On March 18, it was reported that Kempson intended to appeal both his conviction and sentence. Story number 7. The Curious Case of Jeffrey MacDonald. Jeffrey MacDonald was born in Jamaica, Queens, New York, as the second of 3 children to Robert and Dorothy MacDonald. His upbringing on Long Island was modest, with his father enforcing strict discipline in the household. Although Robert MacDonald was not physically abusive, he set high expectations for his family, demanding obedience and excellence. Jeffrey's childhood was shaped by this rigorous environment, fostering his drive for success. MacDonald attended Patchogue Medford High School, where he excelled academically and socially. He was widely admired by his peers, earning positions of leadership such as student council president. His classmates voted him both most popular and most likely to succeed, and he was crowned king of the senior prom, solidifying his reputation as a standout student with a bright future. During the 8th grade, MacDonald met Colette Catherine Stevenson, who would later become his wife. He first noticed her walking through the halls of Patchogue High School with her best friend, and although initially drawn to both girls, Colette stood out to him. He soon struck up a conversation with her, and the two developed a friendship that quickly blossomed into a romance. Their relationship deepened when they attended a movie together, and MacDonald later recalled falling in love with Colette during a moment they shared on a theatre balcony while watching A Summer Place. The film's theme song became a sentimental symbol of their connection, with both remembering the significance of the tune whenever it played on the radio. Despite the bond they had formed, their romance came to an end the following summer when Colette, during a trip to Fire Island, ended their relationship. MacDonald later entered a relationship with another young woman, Penny Wells, though their time together was brief. MacDonald's academic achievements earned him a scholarship to Princeton University, where he began studying pre-medicine in 1962. By his second year, his relationship with Penny Wells had ended, and he reconnected with Colette, who was now a freshman at Skidmore College in Saratoga Springs, New York. MacDonald described Colette as having developed into a quiet, shy young woman who sometimes displayed an apprehension toward the world. He found her timidity endearing and came to see himself as her protector in addition to her partner. The two exchanged frequent letters during their time apart, with MacDonald often hitchhiking to visit Colette on weekends. When he learned in August 1963 that Colette was pregnant with their first child, MacDonald made the decision to marry her. Colette left college to prepare for her role as a mother, while MacDonald took steps to support his growing family. Their first daughter, Kimberly Catherine MacDonald, was born on April 18, 1964, marking the beginning of what appeared to be a happy family life, with their scone child, Kristen Jean, being born a few years later. Jeffrey MacDonald began his military career on June 28, 1969, when he was commissioned into the United States Army. In late August 1969, MacDonald was assigned as the group surgeon for the 3rd Special Forces Group at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. He moved to 544 Castle Drive on the base, where he lived with his wife Colette and their 2 daughters, Kimberly and Kristen. The neighborhood, reserved for married officers, offered security from military police. The MacDonalds quickly became well liked in their community, although Colette and Jeffrey were known to argue occasionally. By this time, Colette, who had completed 2 years of college, aspired to earn a bachelor's degree in English literature and eventually teach part-time. In December 1969, the 3rd Special Forces Group was deactivated, and MacDonald was reassigned as a preventive medical officer with the 6th Special Forces Group. Around this time, with Colette approximately 3 months pregnant with their 3rd child, a boy expected in July, MacDonald purchased a Shetland pony for his daughters as a surprise Christmas gift. He kept the purchase secret until Christmas Day, when he revealed the pony, which the girls named Trooper. In a letter written to friends that same month, Colette described her life as happy and normal, expressing contentment with her family and excitement about their growing household. It was on the afternoon of February 16, 1970, where things turned dark. Jeffrey MacDonald was spending time with his 2 daughters, taking them to feed and ride the Christmas pony he had purchased for them. The 3 returned home around 5:45 p.m., after which MacDonald showered and changed into a pair of old blue pajamas. Later that evening, after the family had dinner together, Colette left for an evening class at North Carolina University. MacDonald later described spending time with his daughters before their bedtime. He recalled playing horsey, allowing Kimberly and Kristen to ride on his back as if he were their Shetland pony. Afterward, he put Kristen to bed at approximately 7 p.m., while Kimberly entertained herself with a game at the coffee table. MacDonald then rested for about an hour before joining Kimberly to watch her favorite television show, Laugh In. After the show, he helped Kimberly to bed. Colette returned home at approximately 9:40 p.m., and the couple spent time on the couch watching television together. Colette eventually went to bed during The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, while MacDonald fell asleep on the living room couch later that night. In the early hours of the next day, at 3:42 a.m., emergency dispatchers received a call from Jeffrey MacDonald. Speaking faintly, he pleaded, 544 Castle Drive, stabbing. 544 Castle Drive, stabbing, hurry. Before the call ended, the sound of the phone hitting a hard surface was heard. Police arrived at the scene within 10 minutes, initially treating the situation as a domestic disturbance. The front door of the MacDonald residence was found locked, and the house appeared dark. Receiving no response at the door, officers moved to the back of the house, where they found the screen door unlocked and the interior door ajar. Entering through the back, a police sergeant proceeded to the master bedroom and quickly rushed to the front of the house, shouting for immediate medical assistance. Inside the master bedroom, Colette MacDonald was found lying on her back on the floor, her body showing evidence of extreme violence. One of her eyes was open, and her chest was partially exposed. She had been brutally beaten, with injuries that included broken forearms, consistent with defensive wounds, as well as 21 stab wounds to her chest, inflicted with an ice pick, and 16 additional stab wounds to her neck and chest from a knife. Her trachea had been severed in 2 places. A torn and bloodied pajama top was draped across her chest, and a paring knife was found lying nearby. Jeffrey MacDonald was discovered lying face down next to her, wounded but alive, with his head resting on Colette's chest and one arm around her neck. As officers approached, he murmured, "Check my kids. I heard my kids crying." 5-year-old Kimberly was discovered in her bed. She had been bludgeoned repeatedly, with several wounds to her head and body. Her injuries included severe fractures to her skull from at least 2 blows to the right side of her head, which caused brain trauma. Additionally, she had been stabbed in the neck between 8 and 10 times. Kimberly's wounds were so severe that medical examiners later concluded she would have fallen into a coma and died shortly after the injuries were inflicted. 2-year-old Kristen was found in her own bed across the hallway. Her body was positioned on her side, with a baby bottle lying near her mouth. She had been stabbed a total of 48 times, 33 times with a knife, and 15 times with an ice pick. 2 of the knife wounds had penetrated her heart, while the ice pick wounds were determined to be shallow. Several injuries to her hands were identified as defensive wounds, indicating that she had attempted to shield herself from the attack. On the headboard of the MacDonald's bed, the word pig had been scrawled in large 8-inch letters. The blood used to write this was later identified as belonging to Colette. Jeffrey MacDonald, though injured, remained conscious. After receiving preliminary medical assistance, he sat upright and reportedly exclaimed, "Jesus Christ, look at my wife. I'm gonna kill those goddamned acid heads." Medical staff examining Jeffrey MacDonald found that his injuries were significantly less severe than those suffered by his wife and daughters. He displayed minor cuts, bruises, and fingernail scratches on his face and chest, none of which required stitches or were life-threatening. He also had a mild concussion and a single stab wound on his right side, located between 2 ribs. This injury, described by a surgeon as a clean and sharp incision about 5/8 of an inch deep, had caused a partial collapse of his lung. Despite this, his condition was stable, and he was discharged from the hospital after 9 days. During questioning by the Army's Criminal Investigation Division, MacDonald recounted his version of the events leading up to the attack. According to his statement, he had washed the dinner dishes around 2 a.m. on February 17th before heading to bed. However, he discovered that his youngest daughter, Kristen, had wet his side of the bed. Not wanting to disturb his wife by changing the sheets, he said he moved Kristen to her own bed, grabbed a blanket from her room, and settled on the living room couch to sleep. MacDonald claimed that he was awakened later by the sound of his wife and eldest daughter screaming. He recalled hearing Colette yelling, "Jeff! Jeff! Help! Why are they doing this to me?" As he got up to assist them, he said he was confronted by 3 men and a woman who had broken into the home. The group allegedly consisted of 2 white men, a black man, and a blonde woman. MacDonald described one of the white men as shorter and wearing what appeared to be lightweight or surgical gloves. The female intruder, he claimed, was wearing high-heeled, knee-high boots and a floppy hat that partially obscured her face. She held a lit candle and was chanting, "Kill the pigs!" According to MacDonald, the 3 men attacked him using a club and an ice pick, while the woman encouraged them, shouting, "Hit him again!" During the struggle, his pajama top was pulled over his head, trapping his arms in the fabric. He said he used the bundled garment to deflect the ice pick thrusts, but was eventually overpowered and knocked unconscious near the hallway leading to the bedrooms. When he regained consciousness, he claimed the intruders had fled the house. MacDonald stated that after regaining consciousness, he stumbled through the home, attempting to save his family. He said he performed mouth-to-mouth resuscitation on his daughters, though neither responded. He then found Colette in the master bedroom with a paring knife in her chest. According to MacDonald, he pulled the knife out, tossed it aside, and checked for a pulse but found none. He then draped his pajama top over her body before calling for emergency assistance. In the immediate aftermath of the discoveries at 544 Castle Drive, military police launched an effort to locate the individuals Jeffrey MacDonald claimed were responsible for the attack on his family. Officers were instructed to stop and identify any individuals matching the descriptions MacDonald provided. Despite extensive checks of vehicles and individuals around Fort Bragg, the area in which they lived, the search yielded no results, and the operation was called off by 6 a.m. At daylight on February 17th, investigators located the suspected murder weapons near the back door of the MacDonald home. The items included a kitchen knife, an ice pick, and a 31-inch piece of lumber with traces of blood and 2 blue threads attached to it. All 3 items were confirmed to have originated from the MacDonald household and were wiped clean of fingerprints. MacDonald later denied any familiarity with the weapons. As investigators from the Army's Criminal Investigation Division analyzed the crime scene and physical evidence, they began to doubt MacDonald's version of events. While he claimed to have fought for his life against multiple armed intruders, the living room showed minimal signs of a struggle. A coffee table was found tipped on its side, with a pile of magazines neatly beneath it, and a knocked-over flower pot was the only other significant disturbance in the room. Despite the apparent lack of chaos, MacDonald, trained in unarmed combat, claimed to have been overpowered by the attackers. Neighbors reported hearing no commotion or struggle during the early morning hours, but mentioned hearing Colette shouting angrily. A 16-year-old neighbor, who occasionally babysat for the MacDonald family, told investigators that in the month leading up to the murders, Colette and Jeffrey seemed distant and indifferent toward one another. By February 23rd, Colonel Robert Kriwanek, the Fort Bragg Provost Marshal, informed the FBI that the search for the 4 alleged intruders should be discontinued due to lack of evidence. Further scrutiny of the crime scene raised more questions about MacDonald's account. No fibers from his torn pajama top were found in the living room, where he claimed the garment had been ripped during the struggle. Instead, fibers from the pajama top were discovered under Colette's body and in the bedrooms of both Kimberly and Kristen. 1 fiber was also recovered from beneath Kristen's fingernail. Additionally, a fragment of skin was found under Colette's fingernail, but this evidence was later lost. Blood-stained wood splinters, likely originating from the piece of lumber found outside, were located in all 3 bedrooms, but were absent from the living room where MacDonald claimed to have been attacked. No blood or fingerprints were found on the telephones. MacDonald said he used to call for help after checking on his family and attempting resuscitation. Investigators also found the blood-stained tip of a surgical glove beneath the headboard of the master bed, where the word "pig" had been written in Colette's blood. The material of the glove matched medical supplies routinely kept in the MacDonald household kitchen. Another inconsistency emerged regarding MacDonald's claim that the female intruder's boots had been wet from the rain. Although it had rained on the night of February 16th to 17th, the only footprint observed at the scene was a bloody bare footprint in Kristen's bedroom, leading from her bed toward the doorway. By mid-March, forensic analysis of the evidence further undermined MacDonald's claims and strengthened investigators' belief in his guilt. For instance, Kimberly's blood was found on MacDonald's pajama top, despite his assertion that he had not been wearing it in her room while attempting to resuscitate her. MacDonald's own blood, however, was largely confined to 2 locations: near the kitchen cabinet containing rubber gloves and on the right side of the hallway bathroom sink. Forensic evidence also revealed that Colette's blood was present in Kristen's room, even though the victims were found in separate rooms. This suggested that Colette had been attacked in Kristen's room before her body was moved. Investigators also questioned why intruders would have bothered to return Kimberly to her bedroom after assaulting her in the master bedroom. The case was further complicated by the fact that each member of the MacDonald family had a different blood type, a rare scenario that allowed investigators to reconstruct the movements of each individual during the attack. Based on blood patterns, wound analysis, and the distribution of fibers and evidence throughout the home, investigators developed a theory of the events that pointed to MacDonald as the perpetrator. They concluded that the crime scene was inconsistent with the story of a home invasion and more likely reflected a staged attempt to cover up the true sequence of events. On April 6, 1970, Army investigators formally cautioned Jeffrey MacDonald before conducting an in-depth interrogation. MacDonald was initially asked to recount his version of events. during which he repeated his claims of being attacked by 4 intruders. He described grappling with them, falling to the ground, and seeing the top of some boots before losing consciousness. He stated that he regained awareness in the hallway, experiencing symptoms of a collapsed lung, which he believed was caused by a stab wound inflicted during the attack. The investigators, however, remained skeptical of his account. During the questioning, Criminal Investigation Division investigator William Ivory directly asked MacDonald, "You didn't do it yourself, did you?" MacDonald denied the accusation, referencing his chest wound and asserting that he had to convince hospital staff to insert a chest tube because he was certain his lung had been punctured. The conversation then shifted to the crime scene and forensic evidence. MacDonald denied that the murder weapons had come from his home, despite investigators presenting evidence that the piece of lumber matched wood taken from Kimberly's bedroom closet. He also claimed ignorance about how the fiber and blood evidence contradicted his narrative. Investigator Robert Shaw highlighted the lack of visible damage within the household, contrasting it with what would be expected from a violent struggle involving multiple intruders. Shaw noted that the home showed minimal signs of disruption, with the only noticeable disarray being a coffee table that had tipped onto its side but not fully overturned, and a nearby flower pot that remained upright while the plant had fallen to the carpet. Shaw pointed out that in typical cases involving multiple attackers, they would expect evidence such as broken furniture, smashed mirrors, or damaged walls. MacDonald struggled to provide a satisfactory explanation and could not account for how Kimberly's blood and brain serum were discovered in the master bedroom. After a brief pause, the interrogation resumed later that afternoon. Investigator Franz Grebner pressed MacDonald further, listing numerous inconsistencies between his story and the forensic evidence. Grebner accused him of staging the crime scene to mislead investigators. MacDonald grew defensive, accusing Grebner of fabricating a case against him to maintain a high clearance rate for homicides. Grebner responded, pointing out that all available evidence indicated MacDonald's involvement in the murders, rather than an outside group of intruders randomly selecting 544 Castle Drive and leaving little trace of their presence. When asked if he would agree to a polygraph test to verify his statements, MacDonald initially agreed. However, within 10 minutes of the interrogation ending, he contacted the investigators to retract his consent, stating he would no longer submit to the test. That same evening, MacDonald was relieved of his duties and placed under restriction while the investigation continued. The next day, he was assigned an army lawyer to represent him. Following the advice of his mother, MacDonald decided to hire a private attorney instead. On April 10th, he retained Bernard Siegel, a high-profile civilian defense attorney, to take on his case. Less than a month later, on May 1st, 1970, the Army formally charged Jeffrey MacDonald with 3 counts of murder. On the same day, MacDonald wrote a letter to Colette's mother and stepfather, expressing his innocence and accusing the Army of refusing to admit their mistake. He speculated that Colette's soul might possess infinite patience and understanding as he navigated his legal troubles. Following MacDonald's testimony, a clinical psychologist testified about the results of psychological tests conducted on him. The psychologist noted that MacDonald displayed an extraordinary lack of anxiety, depression, or anger regarding the murders of his wife and daughters. He concluded that MacDonald exhibited a strong tendency toward denial or repression, which appeared to blunt the emotional impact of the murders. The psychologist suggested that this psychological defense mechanism could lead MacDonald to portray himself as a victim in response to the situation. Despite this, Jeffrey to this day is still pleading his innocence. Story number 8. The Watts family murder. Shanann Watts was dealing with significant health challenges in 2010 when she first connected with Chris through Facebook. In a video shared online just months before her death, she reflected on that time, saying, "I was in a really bad place. And then I got a friend request from Chris on Facebook. I thought, why not? I'll never meet him anyway. And now, 8 years later, we have 2 kids, live in Colorado, and he's been the best thing that's ever happened to me. After the couple relocated to Colorado, they began building their family. Their first daughter, Bella, was born in December 2013. Shanann's family later remembered how thrilled she was to become a mother, saying in her obituary, "She was overjoyed to welcome her baby girl. She loved and cherished her deeply." In July 2015, their second daughter, Celeste, was born. Shanann's family described how meaningful this was to her, particularly given her battle with lupus, writing, "She was so excited to have another child. Every moment with her was a blessing." By 2018, Shanann was pregnant again, this time with a baby boy she planned to name Nico. From the outside, Shanann and Chris Watts' marriage seemed strong. However, by the summer of 2018, Shanann began noticing changes in her husband's behavior. On August 7th, she texted a friend, expressing her concerns. "He has changed. I don't know who he is. He hasn't touched me all week, kissed me, or talked to me unless I'm trying to figure out what's wrong. We've never had issues like this in our relationship before. I just want to cry." A week later, on August 13th, Shanann and her daughters, Bella and Celeste, were last seen alive. Following their disappearance, Chris gave awkward television interviews, pleading for their return. Speaking to Denver 7 the day after they went missing, he described their last moments, stating, "We had an emotional conversation. She wasn't here. The kids weren't here. Nobody was here." On August 16th, authorities discovered Shanann's body on the property of Anadarko Petroleum Corporation, where Chris worked. Bella and Celeste's remains were later found inside nearby oil tanks. An autopsy revealed Shanann had been strangled, while Bella and Celeste were smothered, crimes committed with Chris's bare hands. Chris was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of tampering with evidence. While in custody, Chris claimed he had told Shanann he wanted to separate and alleged that he later found her strangling Celeste, with Bella already lifeless nearby. According to his account, he killed Shanann in a fit of rage. Investigators, however, did not believe his version of events. His story didn't match the evidence we had, a police source revealed. Authorities ultimately concluded that Chris was responsible for all 3 murders. Authorities uncovered that Chris Watts was having an affair with Nicole Kessinger, a co-worker at his company. After learning about the murders, Kessinger cooperated with the police, providing details about her relationship with Watts. Kessinger told investigators that she had believed Watts was in the process of an amicable divorce at the time of their relationship. A memorial service for Shanann, her daughters, and her unborn son, Nico, was held at Sacred Heart Catholic Church in Pinehurst, North Carolina, drawing hundreds of mourners. Shanann's brother, Frankie Zuchek, expressed his heartbreak during her eulogy, writing, "I always worried about her and the girls being so far away because I couldn't protect them." While he did not mention Chris Watts during the eulogy, Zuchek had previously called him a heartless psychopath and accused him of stealing his entire world. On November 6, 2018, in a dramatic turn of events, Chris Watts pleaded guilty to the murders of his pregnant wife and 2 daughters in exchange for avoiding a potential death sentence. The evidence against him was overwhelming, a source close to the case revealed. He had no choice but to plead guilty. However, the plea deal was not without controversy. Watts's mother, Cindy, gave interviews expressing her belief that her son's confession had been coerced. 2 weeks later, on November 19, 2018, Chris Watts was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During the sentencing, prosecutors condemned his actions, stating, "The defendant coldly and deliberately ended 4 lives." In powerful victim impact statements, Shanann's father, Frank Zuchek, repeatedly referred to Watts as a monster. Her mother, Sandra Zuchek, addressed him directly, saying, I have no idea who gave you the right to take their lives, but I know God and his mighty angels were there in that moment to bring them home to paradise. The sentencing brought some closure to Shanann's grieving family, but the devastating loss of her and her children left an indelible mark. Story number 9. The Humiliation of Sylvia Likens. Sylvia Marie Likens was born on January 3, 1949, as the third of 5 children to Lester Cecil Likens and Elizabeth Grimes, both of whom worked in the carnival business. She had 2 sets of fraternal twin siblings, Daniel and Diana, who were 2 years older, and Benny and Jenny, who were a year younger. Her younger sister Jenny suffered from polio, which left one of her legs significantly weaker, causing her to walk with a limp and rely on a steel brace for support. As a teenager, Sylvia took on small jobs such as babysitting, running errands, and ironing clothes for neighbors to earn extra money, often sharing a portion of her earnings with her mother. She was described as a friendly and outgoing girl with a lively personality. She had long, wavy, light brown hair that fell past her shoulders and was affectionately called Cookie by her friends. Despite her cheerful nature, she was self-conscious about her smile due to a missing front tooth, which she had lost during a playful scuffle with one of her brothers as a child. Sylvia had a deep love for music, particularly the Beatles, and was known for being especially protective of her more timid and insecure younger sister, Jenny. By June 1965, Sylvia and Jenny Likens were living with their parents in Indianapolis. However, on July 3rd, their mother was arrested and later incarcerated for shoplifting. Shortly after, their father, Lester Likens, made arrangements for the sisters to stay with Gertrude Banaszewski, the mother of 2 girls, Paula and Stephanie, whom Sylvia and Jenny had recently met while attending Arsenal Technical High School. Gertrude assured Lester that she would look after the girls as if they were her own children until his return. Following the 4th of July holiday, Sylvia and Jenny moved into the Banaszewski home at 3850 East New York Street. This arrangement allowed their father, and later their mother, to travel to the East Coast with the carnival, with the understanding that Gertrude would receive $20 per week to cover their care. The plan was for their parents to retrieve them in November. Initially, the sisters experienced little mistreatment in their new living situation. Sylvia spent time with Stephanie Banaszewski, often singing along to pop music, and willingly helped with household chores. Both Sylvia and Jenny also attended Sunday school with the Banaszewski children, where Sylvia was noted for her devoutness by the church pastor. Although Lester Likens had committed to making regular payments, after about 2 weeks, the money began arriving late, sometimes by a day or 2. Gertrude, already struggling financially, took out her frustration on Sylvia and Jenny, beginning with physical punishment. She would strike them on their bare buttocks with a wooden paddle, venting her anger over the delayed payments. During these beatings, she would berate them, once shouting, "I took care of you little bitches for a week for nothing." In late August, both girls suffered a particularly severe beating, each struck approximately 15 times on the back with the paddle. This punishment was instigated by Paula Banaszewski, who accused the sisters of eating too much at a church supper. As the summer wore on, Gertrude's abuse increasingly focused on Sylvia. Witnesses later speculated that her mistreatment stemmed from jealousy. Sylvia was young, attractive, and full of potential, a stark contrast to Gertrude's own struggles and declining health. Sylvia's mistreatment became a regular occurrence, with punishments inflicted after she returned home from school and continuing through weekends. She was frequently beaten, denied food, and sometimes forced to eat leftovers salvaged from the garbage. On one occasion, she was accused of stealing candy, though she had in fact paid for it herself. A particularly humiliating incident took place when Sylvia mentioned having a boyfriend in Long Beach, California, whom she had met earlier that year while living with her family. Gertrude questioned her about any romantic experiences, and Sylvia, misunderstanding her intent, casually mentioned outings with boys, including one instance where she had lain under a blanket at the beach. Gertrude seized on this, falsely accusing Sylvia of promiscuity and pregnancy. She mocked her, saying, "You're getting big in the stomach, Sylvia. It looks like you're going to have a baby." Believing it to be a joke, Sylvia laughed and replied, "Yeah, I sure am getting big. I guess I'll have to go on a diet." This response enraged Gertrude, who insisted that any girl who spent time with boys would inevitably become pregnant. Without warning, she kicked Sylvia in the genitals. Paula, who was herself 3 months pregnant and envious of Sylvia's youthful appearance, joined in the attack. Another disturbing incident occurred during a meal. Gertrude, Paula, and a neighborhood boy named Randy Gordon Lepper forced Sylvia to eat a hot dog that had been overloaded with excessive amounts of mustard, spices, and other condiments. When Sylvia vomited, they cruelly forced her to eat what she had regurgitated. Feeling unfairly targeted and desperate for a means of retaliation, Sylvia spread a rumor at school that Paula and Stephanie were prostitutes. Stephanie learned about this when a classmate jokingly propositioned her, prompting her to confront Sylvia. Tearfully, Sylvia admitted to starting the rumor and apologized. Stephanie, moved by her remorse, began crying as well and seemed willing to forgive her. However, when Stephanie's boyfriend, 15-year-old Coy Hubbard, heard of the rumor, he was enraged. He confronted Sylvia at the Banishowski home, where he physically assaulted her, slapping her across the face, slamming her head into a wall and flipping her backward onto the floor. Gertrude, upon learning of the rumor, also punished Sylvia, striking her with a wooden paddle. The brutality escalated in the following weeks. Paula repeatedly beat Sylvia, once striking her with such force that she fractured her own wrist. Despite the injury, she continued her assaults, using her cast as a weapon to hit Sylvia even harder. Gertrude continued her verbal abuse, frequently accusing Sylvia of promiscuity and condemning her as a filthy prostitute. Gertrude's cruelty extended beyond physical violence. She manipulated Jenny into participating in the abuse. She forced Jenny to hit her sister under threat of beatings, making the younger girl complicit in Sylvia's torment. Coy Hubbard, along with other neighborhood boys who frequently visited the Banishowski home, took part in Sylvia's torment. With Gertrude's encouragement, they beat her regularly, used her as a target for judo practice, and burned her over 100 times with lit cigarettes. The injuries to Sylvia's body became more severe over time, with deep lacerations and wounds covering her skin. One of the most degrading incidents occurred when Gertrude forced Sylvia to strip naked in the family's living room in front of the Banishowski children and neighborhood boys. She then ordered Sylvia to perform an obscene act with a glass Pepsi bottle. Laughing at the horror and humiliation on Sylvia's face, Gertrude claimed the act was to prove to Jenny what kind of girl you are. As the abuse worsened, Gertrude banned Sylvia from attending school after she took a gym uniform without permission, claiming she had stolen it because Gertrude refused to buy her one. To punish her, Gertrude whipped Sylvia with a thick police belt before once again kicking her in the genitals. Stephanie, witnessing this, finally attempted to defend Sylvia, yelling, "She didn't do anything." But Gertrude ignored her. Not satisfied with just physical abuse, Gertrude burned Sylvia's fingertips with matches before beating her again. Days later, Jenny was also punished, whipped with the same police belt, after allegedly stealing a single tennis shoe from school to wear on her stronger foot. Sylvia and Jenny Likens endured their suffering in silence, fearful that telling an adult, whether at school or within their family, would only lead to worse repercussions. Jenny, in particular, was deeply conflicted about reaching out for help, as Gertrude Banishewski had threatened that if she spoke up, she would endure the same level of abuse and torture as Sylvia. Jenny also faced bullying from girls in the neighborhood, and if she even hinted at Sylvia's mistreatment, she was mocked or physically punished. Throughout July and August, Lester and Elizabeth Likens made occasional trips back to Indianapolis when their travel schedule allowed. Their final visit occurred on October 5, 1965. During that visit, neither Sylvia nor Jenny displayed any obvious signs of distress or mistreatment in front of their parents, likely because they were being closely monitored by Gertrude and her children. As soon as their parents left the house, Gertrude turned to Sylvia and taunted her, saying, "What are you going to do now, Sylvia? Now they're gone." In September, Sylvia and Jenny happened to meet their older sister, Diana Shoemaker, at a local park. They confided in her about the abuse they were enduring at the hands of their caretaker, explaining that Sylvia, in particular, was being singled out for beatings, often for things she had never said or done. However, neither of them revealed the exact address where they were living. And at first, Diana dismissed their claims, believing they might have been exaggerating. A few weeks earlier, the sisters had encountered Diana in the same park, while accompanied by 11-year-old Marie Banishevsky. At that time, Sylvia had mentioned that she was hungry, prompting Diana to give her a sandwich. Sylvia didn't discuss her situation further, but Marie later told her family that Sylvia had been given food. When Gertrude learned of this, she accused Sylvia of gluttony and subjected her to another brutal punishment. Along with Paula, Gertrude choked and beat Sylvia before forcing her into a scalding bath, which she claimed would cleanse her of sin. Whenever Sylvia fainted from the heat and pain, Gertrude would yank her hair and slam her head against the bathtub to revive her. Shortly after this incident, the father of a neighborhood boy, Michael John Monroe, anonymously called Arsenal Technical High School to report that a girl with open sores covering her body was living at the Banishevsky household. Since Sylvia had been absent from school for several days, a school nurse was sent to investigate. When questioned, Gertrude lied to the nurse, claiming that Sylvia had run away the previous week and that she had no knowledge of her whereabouts. She further described Sylvia as an unruly girl who refused to maintain personal hygiene and insisted that she had been a bad influence on both her own children and her sister. Despite the alarming report, the school did not pursue any further investigation into Sylvia's welfare. Gertrude's immediate neighbors, Raymond and Phyllis Vermillion, had initially believed that she was providing proper care for the Likens sisters. The couple had visited the Banishevsky home twice while the girls were living there. However, during both visits, they witnessed Paula physically attacking Sylvia. On each occasion, Sylvia had a visible black eye, and Paula openly bragged about her treatment of the girl. When the Vermillions returned a second time, they noticed a drastic change in Sylvia. She appeared withdrawn, frail, and emotionally detached, almost as if she had been zombified. Despite seeing clear evidence of Sylvia's abuse, neither Raymond nor Phyllis reported their concerns to the authorities. By early October, Diana Shoemaker had finally learned that her sisters were living at the Banishevsky home and attempted to visit them. However, when she arrived at the property, Gertrude refused to let her in. She falsely claimed that she had been given explicit permission from the girls' parents to prevent them from seeing their older sister. Diana was then ordered to leave. Approximately 2 weeks later, Diana ran into Jenny by chance near the Banishevsky house and immediately asked about Sylvia. Jenny's response was brief but chilling. "I can't tell you or I'll get into trouble." As the severity of Sylvia Likens' abuse intensified, her physical condition deteriorated. She eventually became incontinent due to the relentless beatings and mistreatment. In response, Gertrude Banishevsky forbade her from using the bathroom, forcing her to relieve herself where she lay. When Sylvia inevitably soiled herself, Gertrude deemed it an unforgivable offense. On October 6th, as a form of punishment, she was thrown into the basement and restrained. From that point forward, Sylvia was confined to the dark, cold basement, where she was often left completely naked. She was rarely given food or water, and was subjected to further physical and psychological torture. At times, she was tied to the railing of the basement stairs, with her feet barely touching the ground, left to dangle for extended periods. Prior to locking her in the basement, Gertrude had already been escalating her torment of Sylvia. She frequently incited her children and other neighborhood kids to attack the girl, often by falsely claiming that Sylvia had insulted them or the household. This manipulation fueled further violence, as the children sought to punish Sylvia for things she had never said or done. On one occasion, Gertrude grabbed a knife and taunted Sylvia, daring her to fight back. "Come on, fight me back," she mocked. Sylvia, weak and terrified, responded, "I don't know how to fight." In response, Gertrude slashed Sylvia's leg with the knife, leaving a shallow wound. There were rare pauses in the abuse, mainly when the Banizevsky family gathered to watch their favorite television programs. However, the violence quickly resumed once their entertainment was over. Even local children participated in the cruelty, as Gertrude began charging them 5 cents each to enter the basement and witness Sylvia's suffering. For a small fee, they were allowed to humiliate, burn, scold, and beat her, further deepening her agony. Throughout Sylvia's captivity, Gertrude, along with her children and their friends, frequently gagged and restrained her. One particularly horrific form of torture involved placing Sylvia in a bathtub filled with scalding water while rubbing salt into her raw wounds, intensifying her pain. In another appalling incident, Gertrude and her 12-year-old son, John Jr., forced Sylvia to ingest human waste. They took a soiled diaper from Gertrude's 1-year-old son and smeared its contents into Sylvia's mouth. Afterward, Gertrude handed her a cup containing only a small amount of water and told her that it was the only liquid she would receive for the entire day. By October 22nd, Sylvia was severely malnourished and nearing the brink of death. That day, John Jr. cruelly taunted her by offering her a bowl of soup, only to snatch it away the moment she reached for it. Her frail body trembled from starvation, yet she was denied even this small reprieve. That night, for the first time in weeks, Gertrude allowed Sylvia to sleep upstairs on the condition that she did not wet herself. Desperate for comfort, Sylvia quietly pleaded with her sister Jenny to sneak her a glass of water before she fell asleep. The following morning, Gertrude discovered that Sylvia had once again urinated on herself. Enraged, she subjected the girl to a new level of humiliation. As punishment, she forced Sylvia to insert an empty glass Coca-Cola bottle into her vagina, while the Banishevsky children looked on. After the horrifying ordeal, Gertrude ordered Sylvia back into the basement, where her suffering would only continue. On October 25th, Sylvia Likens made a desperate attempt to escape from the basement after overhearing Gertrude Banizevsky and John Banizevsky Jr. discussing their plan to abandon her and leave her to die. Despite her extreme weakness and extensive injuries, she struggled toward the front door, but before she could reach it, Gertrude caught her. As punishment, Sylvia was given crackers to eat, but her severe dehydration made it impossible for her to swallow. Frustrated, Gertrude forcibly shoved the food into her mouth before grabbing a curtain rod and striking her repeatedly in the face, hitting her so hard that the rod bent at sharp angles. Coy Hubbard then took the rod and delivered another blow, knocking Sylvia unconscious. Once again, Gertrude dragged her back into the basement. That night, Sylvia gathered the last of her strength to scream for help, banging on the basement walls with a spade in hopes that a neighbor might hear her. A nearby resident later reported to the police that she had heard the desperate cries coming from the Banishevsky home. However, since the noise suddenly stopped around 3 a.m., she ultimately decided against alerting the authorities. By the morning of October 26th, Sylvia was no longer able to speak clearly or control her body movements. Gertrude dragged her into the kitchen, propped her up against the wall, and attempted to feed her a donut and a glass of milk. When Sylvia was too weak to lift the glass to her lips, Gertrude, overcome with frustration, threw her to the floor before sending her back to the basement. Sylvia's condition deteriorated quickly. She became delirious, mumbling incoherently and moaning in pain. At one point, Paula Banizevsky mocked her by demanding that she recite the alphabet. But Sylvia could only manage the first few letters before her words failed. Annoyed, Paula threatened her, saying that if she didn't stand up, she would jump on her. Meanwhile, Gertrude ordered Sylvia, who had soiled herself, to clean up the mess. That afternoon, several of Sylvia's tormentors gathered in the basement. Sylvia was then given a rotten pear to eat, but when she attempted to bite into it, she complained that her teeth felt loose. Jenny, her younger sister, gently reminded her, "Don't you remember, Sylvia? Your front tooth was knocked out when you were 7. Jenny then left the basement to do gardening work for the neighbors, hoping to earn a little money. At Gertrude's request, Randy Lepper brought a garden hose into the basement that afternoon. Laughing, John Banaszewski Jr. sprayed Sylvia with the icy water. She tried once again to crawl toward the basement stairs, but before she could reach them, she collapsed. Gertrude responded by stomping on Sylvia's head before standing over her, watching her motionless body in silence. Around 5:30 p.m., Richard Hobbs arrived at the Banaszewski home and headed straight to the basement. As he made his way down, he slipped on the wet stairs and landed heavily on the floor, where he saw Stephanie Banaszewski sobbing and cradling Sylvia's frail, battered body. Their mother had instructed her to clean Sylvia, but Stephanie, overcome with emotion, held her tightly instead. Stephanie and Richard decided to carry Sylvia upstairs, where they bathed her with warm, soapy water and dressed her in clean clothes. They laid her down on a mattress in one of the bedrooms, trying to make her comfortable. In her final moments, Sylvia muttered that she wished her father was there, and pleaded for Stephanie to take her home. Trying to reassure her, Stephanie turned to her younger sister Shirley and said, "Oh, she'll be all right." Moments later, Sylvia stopped breathing. Panicked, Stephanie tried performing mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, but it was too late. As the children in the house reacted in shock, Gertrude shouted that Sylvia was faking. However, there was no deception. At just 16 years old, Sylvia Likens had succumbed to the brutal injuries inflicted upon her. In an attempt to revive Sylvia, Gertrude Banaszewski struck her lifeless body with a book, yelling, "Faker!" hoping for a response. When it became clear that Sylvia was not pretending, Gertrude began to panic. She quickly instructed Richard Hobbs to run to a nearby payphone and call the police. Officers arrived at the Banaszewski residence around 6:30 p.m. Gertrude led them to Sylvia's bedroom, where her emaciated, bruised and mutilated body lay on a stained mattress. Without hesitation, Gertrude handed the police the letter she had previously forced Sylvia to write under her dictation. She fabricated a story, claiming that she had been treating the girl's injuries for over an hour, rubbing alcohol on her wounds in a failed attempt to help. She further alleged that Sylvia had run away with a group of teenage boys and had returned to the house earlier that afternoon, disheveled, half-dressed, and clutching the note. Paula Banaszewski, holding a Bible in her hands, looked around the room and casually remarked that Sylvia's death had been meant to happen. She then turned to Jenny Likens and, without a trace of remorse, offered, "If you want to stay with us, Jenny, we'll treat you like our own sister." Terrified but aware that this was her only chance for help, Jenny initially recited the rehearsed story Gertrude had forced her to memorize. But as soon as she got close enough to one of the officers, she leaned in and whispered desperately, "Get me out of here, and I'll tell you everything." The statement given by Jenny Likens led authorities to take swift action. Within hours of discovering Sylvia's body, police arrested Gertrude Banaszewski, along with Paula, Stephanie, and John Banaszewski Jr., on suspicion of her murder. That same day, Coy Hubbard and Richard Hobbs were also taken into custody and charged with the same crime. The autopsy conducted on Sylvia Likens' body revealed the extent of the horrific abuse she had endured. Her body bore over 150 distinct wounds, and she was severely emaciated at the time of her death. The injuries varied in location, severity, and stage of healing, indicating prolonged and repeated mistreatment. Her body showed extensive bruising, burns, and significant muscle and nerve damage. The trauma to her vaginal area was so severe that it had nearly swollen shut. Additionally, all of her fingernails had been bent backward, and large portions of skin on her face, neck, breasts, and right knee had either peeled away or receded. In what appeared to be a final moment of agony, Sylvia had bitten through her lips, partially severing parts of them from her face. Story number 10. The Case of the Missing Influencer. Gabrielle Petito was born on March 19, 1999, and grew up in Blue Point, New York. She was the eldest among 6 siblings and half-siblings. In 2013, she and her stepbrothers participated in a music video aimed at raising awareness about gun violence in the United States, following the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting. She graduated from Bayport Blue Point High School in 2017, where she first met Brian Christopher Laundrie. Between September 2017 and January 2019, she lived in Carolina Beach, North Carolina, working as a hostess and in the kitchen of a Wilmington restaurant. Although she applied to Cape Fear Community College, she ultimately did not attend. Petito and Laundrie began dating in March 2019, and she later moved in with him and his parents in Northport, Florida. Both worked at a local public supermarket, she as a pharmacy technician and he in the grocery department, until they left their jobs at the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. Between late 2019 and early 2020, the couple took a cross-country road trip from New York to California, visiting destinations such as Las Vegas, Yosemite National Park, and Pismo Beach. Petito celebrated her 21st birthday in March 2020 in Nokomis, Florida. In June of that year, she and Laundrie traveled to Soap Creek, Georgia, and the following month, they became engaged. In December 2020, Petito bought a 2012 Ford Transit Connect, which she converted into a camper for their upcoming travels. To fund their journey, she worked long hours, up to 50 hours a week, at Taco Bell and as a nutritionist, while Laundrie found employment at an organic juice bar. She shared their experiences on social media platforms like Instagram and YouTube, where she highlighted her love for art, yoga, and plant-based foods. On August 12, 2021, a 911 caller reported witnessing a physical altercation between a couple outside the Moonflower Community Cooperative in Moab, Utah. The caller stated that they saw a man slap a woman, after which the two ran up and down the sidewalk before the man struck her again, and they left together in a vehicle. Another witness described seeing a tense exchange, stating that the woman, later identified as Gabby Petito, appeared to be hitting the man, Brian Laundrie, on the arm. The witness also noted that Laundrie seemed to be trying to leave Petito behind while taking her phone. Before driving off, Petito got into the driver's seat, then moved to the passenger side, asking him, "Why do you have to be so mean?" Shortly after, officers from the Moab City Police Department pulled over the couple's van near the entrance of Arches National Park after observing it being driven erratically. Petito, who was visibly distressed and crying, sat in the passenger seat. At first, she downplayed the altercation, but after an officer pointed out scratches on her face and arm, she admitted that Laundrie had grabbed her face, causing an injury. She also mentioned that he had repeatedly told her to shut up. Laundrie told officers that he had suggested they take a break to calm down and that Petito became agitated when he tried to distance himself. He claimed she tried to take his keys and phone, and while he admitted pushing her, he insisted he was only trying to create space between them. Petito admitted that she had hit Laundrie first and pleaded with the officers not to separate them. One of the responding officers noted in his report that throughout the encounter, Petito was unable to stop crying or speak without wiping away tears. The officer wrote that Laundrie attempted to create distance by telling her to take a walk to calm down, but she refused and instead began slapping him. He then grabbed her face and pushed her away as she pressed against him and the van. Neither wanted to press charges, and officers categorized the incident as an emotional breakdown rather than domestic violence, which would have required an arrest. To de-escalate the situation, Police separated them for the night, arranging for Laundrie to stay at a motel while Petito remained with the van. On August 17th, Laundrie flew from Salt Lake City to Tampa, Florida, leaving Petito behind. During this time, Petito stayed at a hotel near Salt Lake City International Airport and checked out on August 24th. According to the Laundrie family attorney, he had taken the trip to retrieve belongings and close out a storage unit in an effort to save money as they considered extending their travels. Laundrie returned to Utah on August 23rd to reunite with Petito and continue their road trip. Petito's mother last spoke to her daughter on August 25th and was told that she and Laundrie were traveling from Utah to Grand Teton and Yellowstone National Parks. That same day, a final Instagram post appeared on Petito's account, featuring photos of her posing in front of a butterfly mural outside a restaurant in Ogden, Utah. On August 27th, surveillance footage from a Whole Foods in Jackson, Wyoming, captured Petito and Laundrie entering the store at 2:14 p.m. and leaving about 16 minutes later. After sitting in their van for another 20 minutes, they drove off toward Bridger Teton National Forest. This was the last confirmed sighting of Petito alive. That same day, Petito's mother received an unusual text from her daughter's phone that read, "Can you help Stan? I just keep getting his voicemails and missed calls." The message raised alarm, as Stan was Petito's grandfather, and she never referred to him by his first name. On August 29th, Laundrie called his mother, and as their conversation ended, his tone suddenly changed. Later, his father contacted him again, at which point Laundrie allegedly said, "Gabby's gone," and indicated that he might need a lawyer. On August 30th, another message was sent from Petito's phone stating, "No service in Yosemite." Her mother later expressed doubt that Petito had written the texts herself. By September 1st, Laundrie had returned alone to his parents' home in Northport, Florida, driving the Ford Transit Connect van. On September 11th, after not hearing from her daughter for weeks, Petito's mother filed a missing person report. 4 days later, Laundrie was named a person of interest. His parents hired an attorney and, following legal advice, refused to discuss the case with investigators. Law enforcement kept watch on the Laundrie household and saw him leave on September 13th. 2 days later, officers saw his vehicle return and mistakenly believed Laundrie had re-entered the home. On September 16th, Northport Police Chief Todd Garrison assured reporters, "We know where Brian Laundrie is." However, on September 17th, Laundrie's parents reported him missing, stating they had not seen him since September 13th. At that point, police realized that they had mistakenly identified his mother as Laundrie, allowing him to leave undetected. Things took a turn for the worse when authorities discovered human remains at the Spread Creek dispersed camping area in Wyoming, near where Petito's van had previously been seen. The remains matched Petito's description, and an autopsy later confirmed her identity. The coroner determined that her death was a homicide, citing blunt force injuries to the head and neck with manual strangulation. The report estimated that she had been killed 3 to 4 weeks before her body was found. On September 23rd, the United States District Court for the District of Wyoming issued an arrest warrant for Brian Laundrie, charging him with unauthorized use of Gabby Petito's debit card. He had allegedly withdrawn $1,000 or more between August 30th and September 1st without permission. In connection with the investigation, the FBI collected material from Laundrie's home to obtain a DNA sample. On October 5th, during an interview with ABC News, Laundrie's sister publicly urged him to turn himself in. 2 days later, his father accompanied law enforcement officers to assist in the search at T. Mabry Carlton Reserve in Sarasota County, Florida. Authorities focused their efforts on areas within the reserve and the neighboring Myakkahatchee Creek Environmental Park, locations Laundrie was known to visit. That same month, skeletal remains and personal belongings belonging to Laundrie were discovered in Myakkahatchee Creek Environmental Park. The area had recently been submerged due to flooding, which had previously hindered search efforts. Forensic dentistry confirmed the remains were his. An initial autopsy was inconclusive in determining his cause of death, prompting officials to send his remains to a forensic anthropologist for further examination. Authorities announced that the forensic analysis concluded Laundrie had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. The FBI disclosed that Brian Laundrie's notebook, discovered near his remains, contained a written confession in which he admitted to killing Gabby Petito. The entry also revealed that he had deliberately sent text messages from her phone to create the illusion that she was still alive. As a result, authorities formally held Laundrie responsible for Petito's death. The FBI's Denver division announced the closure of the case, stating, "The investigation did not identify any other individuals other than Brian Laundrie directly involved in the tragic death of Gabby Petito." The FBI's primary focus throughout the investigation was to bring justice to Gabby and her family. The Laundrie family's attorney released the full contents of the notebook entry, in which Laundrie claimed Petito's death resulted from an accident. He wrote, "I ended her life. I thought it was merciful, that it is what she wanted. But now I see all the mistakes I made." The note concluded with his intention to take his own life, stating, "I'm ending my life not because of a fear of punishment, but rather because I can't stand to live another day without her." However, experts have questioned the credibility of Laundrie's account. Michael Alcazar, a professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, suggested that Laundrie was attempting to justify his actions rather than fully taking responsibility. He described Laundrie's words as those of someone who doesn't want to own up to what he did. Investigators have pointed out that his version of events does not align with the forensic evidence collected in the case. Story number 11. The Killer Hiker. Israel Keyes was born on January 7, 1978, in Richmond, Utah, as the second of 10 children to Heidi Keyes, née Hawkinson, and John Jeffrey Keyes. His parents, originally from Torrance, California, were members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, LDS, with his father having previously served as an LDS missionary in Germany. Until 1983, Keyes and his siblings were homeschooled. After leaving the LDS Church, his father relocated the family to an isolated piece of land in Stevens County, Washington, near Colville, when Keyes was 5 years old. They lived in a remote one-room cabin without electricity or running water on Rocky Creek Road, distancing themselves from mainstream society. In Colville, the family attended a church known as the Ark, which followed the Christian identity movement, a white supremacist belief system. Keyes later described this environment as being similar to Amish communities. While attending the Ark, the Keyes family became acquainted with Chevy Cahoe's family, whose son was later convicted of a triple murder in 1996. Due to the cramped space in their home, some of the Keyes children were forced to sleep in a tent and relied on hunting, chopping firewood, and working on local farms to contribute to the family's survival. As a child, Keyes developed an intense fascination with hunting, targeting any living creature he could find. He once admitted to skinning a deer alive and openly discussed the act with other children at the church, which led to him being ostracized. One girl later recalled that his presence made her feel deeply uneasy. By the time he reached his teenage years, Keyes stood at 6 feet 2 inches tall. He engaged in various delinquent behaviors, including shooting at neighbors' homes with a BB gun and setting fires in the woods. He also started breaking into houses with another boy, who distanced himself after witnessing Keyes kill an animal. In one instance, Keyes stole multiple firearms from a neighbor's house, and when his parents discovered the weapons, they forced him to return them and apologize. Despite this, he continued to sell stolen firearms to adults in the community. During this time, his parents took in close friends, and in their presence, Keyes committed a particularly disturbing act. In front of his sister and another boy, he tied a cat to a tree using a parachute cord and shot it with a .22 revolver. The wounded animal staggered around the tree, eventually collapsing and vomiting. Keyes reportedly found amusement in both the suffering of the cat and the boy's reaction, as the witness became physically ill from what he had seen. This moment was significant for Keyes. He realized he was different from his peers, who were horrified by his behavior. From that point on, he became more secretive about his antisocial tendencies. His mother also began noticing changes in him, particularly his increasing interest in different radio programs and outside influences that clashed with the family's strict beliefs. By his mid-teens, Keyes had developed strong carpentry skills, building his first wooden cabin for the family at age 16. Between 1995 and 1997, he worked for a contractor in Colville. Around this time, he kept a journal filled with Bible verses and personal reflections, detailing his guilt over what he considered sins, such as experiencing lust toward his girlfriend. Eventually, the family moved to Smyrna, Maine, where they lived in an Amish-like community and harvested maple sap for syrup production. Due to their mother's rigid religious beliefs, the Keyes children were not allowed to watch movies unless they did so in secret, nor were they permitted to learn to play musical instruments. At some point, Keyes renounced his Christian faith. Despite having spent much of his life seeking his parents' approval, he openly declared himself an atheist, which led to a severe falling out. His parents, angered by what they saw as blasphemy, disowned him and ordered his younger siblings to sever all contact with him. Following this, Keyes became drawn to Satanism and began planning to commit a ritualistic murder. During a search of Israel Keyes' home, investigators discovered a collection of books related to murder, including both fiction and non-fiction works. Among them, he had repeatedly read Intensity, a 1995 thriller by Dean Koontz, identifying strongly with the novel's serial killer antagonist. In his younger years, he also studied Mindhunter inside the FBI's elite serial crime unit by FBI profiler John E. Douglas, which fueled his interest in criminal behavior. Keyes extensively researched other serial killers, particularly Ted Bundy, whom he viewed as a kindred spirit due to their shared methodical approach and sense of control over their victims, despite differences in their choice of targets and methods. He even attempted to mimic Bundy's infamous courtroom escape, but was quickly restrained by guards. Although fascinated by infamous murderers, Keyes avoided media attention, fearing both the impact on his family and being labeled a copycat. He held contempt for killers who showed remorse, criticizing Dennis Rader for apologizing in court and calling him a wimp. However, he admired criminals who had managed to evade capture. When asked about Alaska-based serial killer Robert Hansen, Keyes responded with enthusiasm, stating, "Yeah, I know all about him. I probably know every single serial killer that's ever been written about. It's kind of a hobby of mine." His interest in criminal cases extended beyond serial killings. When FBI agents mentioned the 2012 Aurora, Colorado movie theater shooting, he inquired about the shooter's fate, expressing a mild curiosity about the gunman, James Holmes. In the summer of 1997 or 1998, Israel Keyes attacked a teenage girl who had been tubing with her friends on the Deschutes River in Maupin, Oregon. He admitted to stalking her from a distance before ambushing her at knife point and sexually assaulting her. Keyes estimated that she was between 14 and 18 years old. Initially, he intended to kill her as part of a ritualistic murder, but ultimately decided to let her go, placing her back onto the tube she had been floating on. Reflecting on the event later, Keyes told investigators that he had hesitated and lacked the level of violence he thought was necessary. Determined not to make the same mistake again, he resolved that he would never let a victim go in the future. On July 9, 1998, Keyes relocated to New York and enlisted in the U.S. Army. He served as a specialist in Alpha Company, 1st Battalion, 5th Infantry, 25th Infantry Division. He also completed a preliminary month-long course in preparation for U.S. Army Rangers training. During his military service, he was stationed at Fort Lewis and Fort Hood and was also deployed overseas. While serving in Sinai, Egypt, he developed friendships with other soldiers, though he reportedly told one of them that he had a desire to kill him. At Fort Lewis, Keyes was assigned to a mortar team. Former colleagues described him as quiet and reserved. On weekends, he engaged in heavy drinking, often consuming entire bottles of Wild Turkey bourbon. In February 2001, he was arrested for driving under the influence in Thurston County, Washington, and later fined $350 as part of a plea deal. Keyes was also known to be a fan of the rap duo Insane Clown Posse, displaying their posters in his barracks. Between December 1998 and July 2001, Keyes was awarded an Army Achievement Medal for his work as a gunner and assistant gunner. Following his honorable discharge, he moved to Neah Bay, Washington. In 2007, he established a construction business in Alaska called Keyes Construction, working as a contractor, handyman, and builder. Clients generally found him to be skilled and reliable, but some women reported that his demeanor occasionally shifted into unsettling expressions or moods that made them uncomfortable. Keyes also maintained connections in New York, where he owned a 10-acre plot of land and a deteriorating cabin in Constable. Authorities suspect that he began his killing spree in 2001 after leaving the military, with evidence suggesting he was responsible for as many as 11 murders across the United States. Unlike many serial killers, Keyes did not have a specific victim profile and instead chose his targets at random to minimize detection. He planned his crimes meticulously, often preparing for months in advance. While traveling for murders, he kept his phone turned off and made all purchases with cash. For one such case, the Courier murders, Keyes flew to Chicago, rented a car, and drove approximately 1,000 miles to Vermont. There, he retrieved a murder kit he had hidden 2 years earlier and used it to commit the crime. To avoid suspicion, Keyes targeted individuals across different locations, often selecting victims from remote campgrounds and isolated areas. He claimed that he preferred strangulation over firearms, as he found satisfaction in watching his victims lose consciousness. Although he stated that he avoided killing children or parents with young children, out of concern for his own daughter learning about his crimes, investigators remained skeptical and suspected him of targeting teenagers and minors. Keyes never confessed to committing any murders during his time in the military, but he did admit to attempting to rape a sex worker while on leave in Egypt and a college student he encountered while in Israel. He also admitted to robbing banks in New York and Texas, with the FBI later confirming that he had robbed a community bank branch in Tupper Lake, New York, in April 2009. Additionally, he disclosed that he had burglarized a home in Texas before setting it on fire. According to FBI reports, Keyes was responsible for breaking into 20 to 30 homes across the U.S. and had carried out multiple bank robberies between 2001 and 2012. After killing Samantha Koenig, Israel Keyes demanded ransom money, allowing law enforcement to track transactions made with her debit card as he traveled through the southwestern United States. Despite public interest, police controversially withheld surveillance footage of Koenig's abduction during the investigation. On the morning of March 13, 2012, Keyes was arrested in the parking lot of the Cotton Patch Cafe in Lufkin, Texas, by Texas Highway Patrol Corporal Brian Henry and Texas Ranger Stephen Rayburn. Authorities had issued a lookout bulletin for a specific vehicle linked to ATM withdrawals made using Koenig's card. Keyes was identified when officers patrolling hotel parking lots for out-of-state rental cars noticed a vehicle matching the suspect's description. He was pulled over for slightly exceeding the speed limit. Upon searching his car, officers found cash stained with dye, indicating a bank robbery. Further inspection uncovered Koenig's ATM card and cell phone, further implicating him. Following his arrest, Keyes was extradited to Alaska. Initially, he denied involvement, claiming that the ATM card and phone had been thrown into his open car window by an unknown person. However, he was formally charged with fraud for illegally using Koenig's bank accounts. Eventually, he admitted to abducting and murdering her. While incarcerated at the Anchorage Correctional Complex, Keyes managed to conceal a razor blade in his cell, despite being under security restrictions that allowed him only an electric razor under supervision. On December 2, 2012, he died by suicide, using the blade to cut his wrists while also attempting to strangle himself. A suicide note was discovered beneath his body, filled with disturbing writings described as an ode to murder. However, the note provided no concrete details regarding additional victims. In 2020, the FBI released images of 11 skulls and a pentagram drawn in blood, found beneath Keyes' bed after his death. One of the drawings included the phrase, "We are one," written at the bottom. Investigators suspect the number of skulls may represent the total number of his victims. Story number 12. The Jogger Who Disappeared. On March 11, 1989, Dennis Bowman contacted the police to report that his 14-year-old daughter, Andrea Bowman, was missing. Dennis described Andrea as a well-behaved child, but around the age of 12, he claimed, her behavior suddenly changed. According to his statements to investigators, later featured in the Netflix docuseries Into the Fire, The Lost Daughter, Andrea had started running away and getting into trouble at school. The day she disappeared, Dennis said he returned home to find that not only was Andrea gone, but so was the cash from his tax refund that he had hidden in a dresser, along with spare change from his younger daughter's baby bank. At first, there were reported sightings of Andrea in nearby Holland, Michigan, at a grocery store, a skating rink, and even as far as Indiana. However, over time, the tips faded and the case went cold. Andrea's biological mother, Kathy Turkanian, had placed her for adoption in 1975 when she was just 9 months old, originally naming her Alexis. She had no idea anything was wrong until 2010, when she received a letter from the adoption agency requesting a DNA sample. At first, she believed her daughter might be looking for her, but the request was actually to determine if an unidentified woman found in a Wisconsin cornfield in 1999 was Andrea. 3 years later, Kathy was informed that there was no DNA match between her and the Jane Doe. However, by then she had made it her mission to uncover what had happened to her daughter. She later set up a Facebook page, Find Andrea Bowman, hoping to connect with others who might have information. She was unprepared for the disturbing accounts she received from people who had known Andrea before she vanished. Old friends shared troubling stories about the conditions in her adoptive home, leading Kathy to question, "Who the hell adopted my daughter?" Dennis and Brenda Bowman, formerly Engweiler, married in 1971 and adopted Andrea in 1975. Dennis, a U.S. Navy veteran, had a criminal past. In February 1981, he was sentenced to 5 to 10 years in prison for assault with intent to commit criminal sexual conduct after attacking a teenage girl the previous year. According to court records featured in the Netflix docuseries Into the Fire, The Lost Daughter, he was released on January 1, 1986, when Andrea was 11 years old. In 1988, Dennis and Brenda had another daughter, Vanessa Bowman. Meanwhile, Andrea's biological mother, Kathy Turkanian, who had been searching for answers about her daughter's disappearance, became convinced that Dennis had killed Andrea and buried her in his backyard. Determined to uncover the truth, Kathy began calling the Bowmans repeatedly and even put up a billboard along the main road near their home, offering an $11,000 reward for information leading to an arrest in the case. However, as investigators noted in the series, Kathy's suspicions alone did not provide enough probable cause to excavate the Bowman property. Throughout the years, Dennis consistently denied any involvement in Andrea's disappearance. That changed in November 2019 when Dennis was arrested, though not initially in connection with Andrea's case. Instead, forensic evidence had linked him to the 1980 murder of Kathleen Doyle in Norfolk, Virginia. At the time of her death, 25-year-old Kathleen had been married to a Navy pilot for less than a year. She lived in a small home in Norfolk while her husband was deployed. On September 9, 1980, Kathleen had a friend over for a couple of glasses of wine. Her friend left around 9:30 p.m. 2 days later, Kathleen was found dead on the floor of her bedroom. Detective John Smith from the Norfolk Police Department's Cold Case Homicide Unit explained in Into the Fire that Kathleen had been strangled, suffering what was described as mechanical asphyxiation. She had also been sexually assaulted. A distinctive burn mark on her cheek matched a Lincoln log toy with a scorched end that was found discarded in her bathroom trash. However, with no clear suspects and no fingerprints at the scene, the case went unsolved for nearly 4 decades. It wasn't until advances in DNA analysis and the rise of forensic genealogy that investigators made progress. They were able to develop a Y chromosome DNA profile from evidence found on Kathleen's bedspread. Using genetic genealogy databases, authorities generated a list of 31 possible matches. Dennis Bowman was the last name on that list. When investigators looked deeper into his background, they discovered his history of sexual violence and his connection to Andrea's disappearance, finally making him a key suspect in both cases. While attending a Regional Homicide Investigators Association conference in Norfolk, Detective John Smith had what he described as a stroke of dumb luck when he crossed paths with Detective Sergeant Brian Fuller of the Michigan State Police. Fuller was already well acquainted with the case of Andrea Bowman and immediately told Smith that Dennis Bowman was likely the man he was searching for. Smith later verified through court records that Dennis had been in Norfolk at the time of Kathleen Doyle's murder, attending a 2-week Navy training camp. Acting on this information, authorities arrested him in Allegan County, Michigan. At the station, they collected DNA from a cup he had used, which was found to be a match to the DNA evidence recovered from Kathleen's bedspread. During a videotaped interview featured in Into the Fire, The Lost Daughter, Dennis admitted to breaking into a house in Norfolk on the night Kathleen was killed. He claimed he was drunk and used a penknife to open a window. According to his version, he was inside the living room when a woman unexpectedly entered and freaked out. He alleged that she grabbed his hand, which was holding the knife, and in the struggle, the blade accidentally pierced her stomach. However, Smith presented the full extent of Kathleen's injuries: stab wounds to the chest and back, bruises all over her body, and her hands tied behind her back, which contradicted Dennis's claim of a single accidental stabbing. When confronted, Dennis's demeanor noticeably shifted. He avoided eye contact, became withdrawn, and took on a childlike manner, according to Smith. As seen in interrogation footage, Dennis adamantly denied sexually assaulting Kathleen or stabbing her multiple times. When left alone in the room, he repeatedly murmured, "I didn't do that." Then twice he whispered, "I've done it again." In June 2020, Dennis Bowman pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, rape, and burglary in Kathleen Doyle's case. He was sentenced to 2 life terms for murder and rape, plus 20 years for burglary. Meanwhile, the investigation into Andrea Bowman's disappearance was also gaining momentum. Now facing a life sentence in Virginia, Dennis was given an opportunity. If he confessed to Andrea's murder, authorities would consider transferring him to Michigan, where he could serve his time closer to his wife, Brenda. As part of the ongoing investigation, authorities searched the Bowmans' yard, just as Andrea's biological mother, Kathy, had long hoped. However, they found no evidence of her remains. During recorded prison phone calls, Dennis repeatedly told Brenda that he had no knowledge of what happened to their daughter. Then, in late 2019, he requested that she visit him in jail, stating that he wanted to speak with her privately. During their videotaped jail conversation, Dennis finally confessed to killing Andrea. He explained that on the day he reported her missing, he had returned home and caught her coming out of their bedroom. When he confronted her, she declared she was leaving and threatened that if he tried to stop her, she would expose his abuse. Enraged, Dennis struck her, causing her to fall down the stairs. He claimed that as he approached, he saw her head roll to the side, staring blankly, like doll eyes. Realizing she was dead, Dennis panicked, fearing he would be sent back to prison. He then carried Andrea's body to the barn, where it remained for several days. During that time, he burned her coat and overnight bag, speculating that the cash he had initially reported stolen may have been inside. Dennis recounted his gruesome efforts to dispose of the body. He first tried stuffing her remains into a cardboard barrel, but when she didn't fit, he dismembered her legs. He then placed the barrel outside next to the neighbor's trash bin on garbage collection day, where it was hauled away. Looking at Brenda, he coldly remarked, "As long as I didn't tell you, you had hope." Authorities continued to monitor Dennis and Brenda Bowman's communications, including letters Dennis sent to his wife. In one letter, dated December 12, 2019, he altered his previous account of what had happened to Andrea Bowman. In this letter, which was shown in the Netflix docuseries Into the Fire, The Lost Daughter, Dennis claimed that Andrea had fallen. But rather than disposing of her body as he had previously described, he now alleged that he gave her a proper burial near a local cemetery. According to his account, she was wearing jeans, a sweater, and a gold necklace with a heart and a cross when he wrapped her in a clean white sheet, like a mummy. He then placed her inside a tarp along with cedar chips, cloves, and cinnamon before burying her. Dennis also admitted that over the years, he had driven past the burial site more than 100 times. Despite this new claim, investigators remained skeptical. They searched several graveyard locations, but found no evidence of a burial site. Authorities urged Brenda Bowman to push Dennis for the truth, believing he was still withholding critical details. Eventually, during a recorded phone call, Dennis finally confessed that Andrea's body was buried in their backyard. When Brenda pointed out that they didn't even live there when Andrea went missing, Dennis changed his story yet again. He explained that he had originally placed her remains in a barrel and buried it at their previous home. Later, when the family moved, he claimed he dug up the barrel and reburied it at their new residence. "I dug the hole and I put the barrel in," Dennis admitted. "She's been right there the whole time." This time, investigators excavated the Bowman's yard using heavy machinery to break through the cement. In February 2020, skeletal remains were uncovered, finally providing proof of what had happened to Andrea. A DNA analysis confirmed that the bones belonged to Andrea Bowman, matching her biological mother, Kathy Turkanian. Reflecting on the discovery in Into the Fire, Kathy remarked that it felt as if her daughter had been screaming in that backyard for years. Andrea's remains were given to Brenda, who had previously told Dennis during one of their recorded conversations that she wanted to keep their baby girl home with me in a very pretty urn. She followed through on this promise by having Andrea's remains cremated. Brenda also offered Kathy half of the ashes, but Kathy struggled with the decision. She reluctantly accepted but expressed heartbreak over the idea, saying, "All that is just chopping her up more." The Into the Fire docuseries noted that Brenda declined to be interviewed or provide any public statements. News attempted to reach her for comment, but was unable to locate contact information. Netflix also did not respond to inquiries. On December 22, 2021, Dennis Bowman pleaded no contest to second-degree murder in Andrea's case. On February 7, 2022, he was sentenced to a minimum of 35 to 50 years in prison. During the sentencing hearing, Allegan County Circuit Court Judge Margaret Zuzik-Bakker described Bowman as a dangerous and remorseless individual with a long history of harming others. His numerous assaults, his behavior in this case, and other convictions all indicate that Mr. Bowman is a serious, dangerous man who has harmed many communities and many families, she stated. It's impossible to even articulate the words to describe what he has done. Reading what he has done, is sickening. Kathy, who was present in court, described the moment as surreal. Speaking to reporters afterward, she reflected on her decade-long fight for justice, saying, "I spent 10 years trying to see that happen." A few weeks later, Dennis Bowman was transferred back to Virginia to begin serving his life sentences for the murder of Kathleen Doyle. According to the Virginia Department of Corrections, the 75-year-old is currently incarcerated at River North Correctional Center in Independence, Virginia.